Mr. Speaker, there's zero action from this tired and out-of-touch government on health care and on the cost of living, and there's more. Earlier this morning, I joined parents at a school in Saskatoon whose children's school has a hole in the roof. When it rains, water pours in like a waterfall. The classrooms and the daycare are closed there today while parents scramble. Now, this Premier wants to talk all of a sudden about the involvement of parents in schools. Mr. Speaker, we think parents should know what's going on in their kids' schools. What does he have to say to the parents that I met today in Saskatoon whose kids' school has a hole in the roof?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question. Mr. Speaker, our ministry has been in touch with the CEF, and the reality is that the roof repair project was underway. Unfortunately, it hit a snag over the weekend, and some more water came into the building. But, Mr. Speaker, we are working actively with CEF to have the project resume. But, Mr. Speaker, this speaks directly to the record that our government has when it comes to investing in education infrastructure. I hear members opposite heckling about PMR. There was no PMR funding under the NDP, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, in this budget year, there's nearly $1 million of PMR funding directly for CEF. We're going to continue working with that division and that school to make sure kids are back in the classroom there. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I stood with parents in front of that school in Saskatoon. Parents who are concerned that even after the Minister for Advanced Education and the member from Saskatoon Riversdale came to see their school, they saw firsthand the tarps hanging from the ceiling. They saw the rotted walls on the second floor. That was in June. There's still no help coming from this Sask Party government. Now, this government has said that they've recalled the legislature because they care about parental inclusion. Well, how about they start with including the over 200 parents who wrote that Premier and they can't even get help fixing the roof over their school?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I know my colleague had addressed the question in his first response, but the members opposite are criticizing a bill that they have not yet seen, Mr. Speaker. The bill hasn't actually been tabled in the Assembly, but that could change, Mr. Speaker. With their consent, we will move after question period that we abridge the notice period such that every member of this Assembly can see the bill right now today, that every member of the gallery can see the bill right now today, and we can have a debate on that bill, Mr. Speaker. Will the NDP give leave? All they have to say is yes, Mr. Speaker, and we could be debating and viewing this bill today. All they have to say is yes. Will they do that? Yes or no?
Carla already said.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you to that government health leader for providing us the best example we could possibly get of how out of touch this Sask Party government is. We've got a legitimate question about a waterfall in a school, and he sits down as brand new education minister to talk about things that don't matter to those parents who have asked the Premier to take action. 200 parents who want to be included. So I'll put it back to that education minister. If you want to include parents, why don't you find your feet and talk about those 200 parents who wrote that Premier looking for action?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, perhaps the member opposite missed my first answer where I mentioned the project is underway. It's funded, Mr. Speaker, as part of our $50 million preventative maintenance and renewal funding, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've made commitments as a government to CEF. We have a school under construction right now in Regina. We have schools committed in Saskatoon and Prince Albert, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we'd love to debate about parents, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're asking the NDP to grant leave after question period so we can debate the Parental Bill of Rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, we have serious problems in schools today, and this government is more interested in stunting around the Assembly about things that don't matter to those 200 parents who just want to save school for their kids. Teachers don't have the resources and supports that they need. Students in overcrowded classrooms across the province and a school in Saskatoon with a gaping hole in the roof, with winter just around the corner. Where is the urgent action from this government to fix the real problems in education, the real problems in our kids' classrooms? Where is the urgent action to fix the roof at the school in Saskatoon?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that member may have trouble hearing the answer. The roof project is being done, Mr. Speaker, and it's being funded through preventative maintenance and renewal. Mr. Speaker, we're answering an urgent action. I don't know how CEF would respond if, under the NDP, there was no money for preventative maintenance and renewal, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government, as I said, we have made numerous commitments to capital all across the province. 90 projects, Mr. Speaker, that we have done, major projects since 2007. We've got projects committed with CEF, Mr. Speaker. The Premier and I were just at a number of school openings, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government is investing in education, and we're going to continue to do so. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government has completely lost the plot. We're seeing it right here today. They called us back to the Assembly for an emergency session to ram through a bill that takes rights away from already vulnerable kids. All while a school in Saskatoon has a gaping hole in the roof, water pouring in, and no plan or help to fix it. This is what our schools look like under this Sask party government. Why won't the minister scrap his divisive plan, get back to work on the basics, things that matter to Saskatchewan parents, which is fixing our kids' classrooms today?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that member opposite talks about listening to parents. Well, I can tell you one thing. I've heard, and members on this side of the House have heard from tens of thousands of people from across this province, parents across this province, Mr. Speaker, that want to be more involved in their child's education. And to be fair, Mr. Speaker, we've heard from people on both sides of the issue. But you know something that unites everybody who contacts us on this issue, Mr. Speaker, is they want to be more involved in their child's education. The piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, that I hope to bring forward this week, maybe even today, Mr. Speaker, that piece of legislation is all about getting parents back involved in their child's education where they belong. We know, Mr. Speaker, that a child's growth and development is best when a parent is involved, Mr. Speaker. Again, the question goes to the members opposite, Mr. Speaker. Why not debate this bill today? Thank you.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, let me be crystal clear. Of course, we want parents involved in their children's education. We know the kids who best. I know that as a parent to 3 school-age children, and I know that from being a public school teacher for a decade. Of course. But this policy
How many schools have you been in, Jeremy?
has been widely criticized by parents in this province, widely and loudly. It's also been criticized by the province's advocate for children and youth. She said in her most recent report that the following on this policy, quote, this policy would likely violate the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. Why is the minister pushing ahead with a policy that the independent children's advocate says will violate human rights in Saskatchewan?
Hear, hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again to the member opposite for the question. Mr. Speaker, why are we pushing forward with this policy? Why are we pushing forward with this legislation, Mr. Speaker? Because, as I said, we've heard from tens of thousands of parents across this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, parents who want to be involved in their child's education. Mr. Speaker, we have an opposition. We have a leader of the opposition that one day she says parents need to be involved in their child's education, but then the next day she says only some parents should be involved in their child's education, Mr. Speaker. Again, we understand this is an important piece of legislation to people on both sides of the House, Mr. Speaker. Why not debate it today?
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
I'll be clear again for that, Mr. Speaker. We are not going to shred the rule book so he can shred the human rights code.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, he's got no answer to my question, so I'll do what a lot of teachers do. I'll give him a redo. The children's advocate said that following through on this policy, quote, would likely violate the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. How can the minister justify using the notwithstanding clause to violate the human rights of already vulnerable children?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said in my previous answers, and I'm going to continue saying this in this House and outside of this House, Mr. Speaker, we have heard from tens of thousands of people who are supporting this policy, Mr. Speaker, from parents, Mr. Speaker, from educators, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in our education system, there are numerous instances where parental consent is required to go on a field trip, Mr. Speaker, to be administered medication. We believe that these important discussions around changing a pronoun or changing a name, that should also require parental consent, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're moving forward with this piece of legislation, and I'm not going to back down just because that member asked me to. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastmead.
Mr. Speaker, that minister is free to share the tens of thousands of people that he's so-called consulted with. Let's be honest, this is not the track record of this government. This is a government with the track record of not consulting with people, ramming through policies and legislation without the proper process. Why is this minister maintaining a process that he knows skirts around the normal process for developing legislation, thorough consultation with all stakeholders, school divisions, teachers, and especially public and open consultation with parents in Saskatchewan?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, this policy and this piece of legislation was given the input of thousands of parents, Mr. Speaker, around the province, Mr. Speaker. Parents who are seeing, Mr. Speaker, policies in school divisions that explicitly excluded them from important conversations. Policies from school divisions, Mr. Speaker, that were opening the doors to wider third-party involvement around sex education and other controversial issues, Mr. Speaker. We've heard from thousands of parents, Mr. Speaker, that want to be involved, and we believe that the default position of government, Mr. Speaker, should be that parents are involved. That's why we're moving forward with this piece of legislation. I hope the NDP will allow us to debate it today. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Eastmead.
Bad choice.
Mr. Speaker, it's becoming more and more clear that this government is not listening to parents, and they're also not listening to the children's advocate. But that's not all. We've heard other folks raise concern about how this policy violates human rights. Justice McGaw wrote in his decision on the injunction, quote, "On the whole of the evidence, I am satisfied that those individuals affected by this policy, youth under the age of 16 who are unable to have their name, pronouns, gender diversity, or gender identity observed in the school, will suffer irreparable harm." A justice of the Court of King's Bench says this policy will cause irreparable harm to young people. What is the minister's response to that?
Recognize the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
We've always been clear. We've always been clear that we would use all available tools to defend parents' rights to be included, informed, and involved, Mr. Speaker. This is about providing clarity. Mr. Speaker, the notwithstanding clause is part of the law. It's part of the Canadian Constitution. Provinces, including Saskatchewan with Alan Blakemey, fought hard for the inclusion of the notwithstanding clause in 1982. And it was Mr. Blakemey who said that the clause does not amount to a, quote, suspension of rights, Mr. Speaker, that the rights enumerated in the Charter are not more important than other rights, that the Charter should not be regarded as creating a, quote, hierarchy of rights, and that there would be instances when, quote, rights collide. This is one of those instances.
Here, here.